right, guys, welcome. Thank you all for coming in. We'll wait a couple of minutes for people to jump on. Gus, how are you doing?
Good, good. How are you, sir?
Excellent. I'm good, thank you. Turn some of that music off. We got, I think, the Facebook stream. This is interesting. This is my first time doing a legit Facebook Live. So, Gus, thanks for being my guinea pig, and everyone watching, thank you. We're going to get in some good stuff. We'll wait a couple more minutes for guys to pop on. Again, so we're just going to be covering some basics of the COVID-19 relief efforts that the government's been putting out here. This is my longtime friend, Gus. He is a partner at Abacus Group, an accounting firm in downtown Toronto. And so we're going to go over some specific things. We have some, we did some Q&A, I think, based on people that were Element members that had some questions, and people that that you work with, Gus, that had some questions. And so we kind of compiled them into the most frequently asked questions, if you will. I guess it's a FAQ kind of deal. So we're going to go over personal stuff and then business stuff. At any time, if you guys have something super pertinent to what we're talking about, feel free to just post it in the comments. If it's super relevant in the moment, just type it right in. We'll pull it up and we'll discuss it. But there will be a time at the end of this where we're going to specifically go over any sort of Q&A question type things that you might have. And then if you do have any questions beyond that, or something like an hour or two later pops up, Gus's website's over there, abacusgroup.ca. You can email them, get in touch with them, and they'll be more than happy to help you out. Cool. All right. Cool. We got some people going on. We got 11 people live here. So I guess we can start off here. We're going to go over to this first personal screen here. And then Gus, you can give me maybe a little bit of background about your company, what you guys do, and then we can just dive right in here and see what kind of questions we get.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess what we do, so, our firm's pretty diverse in terms of service offerings, but we tend to focus on the small business owner. So, some of the other larger accounting firms don't get that sort of personal touch. So that's kind of our ideal clients, are the ones that are, looking to get a little bit more involved with us, maybe on a more frequent basis than just coming around at year-end time and doing your year-end, financial statements and tax return. We like to be involved from a consulting perspective. Clients come up and they'll call us and ask us random questions, especially right now with all these new changes and new subsidies available. A lot of them are, questioning to see whether or not they can apply for these. So, that's our kind of traditional customer base, and yeah.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So let's dive in on the personal side things here. We're just going to go through these things in order. So if you look, I guess, kind of above me right now, these are kind of the topics that we've compiled. And we're going to go through them in order. This recording is going to stay up after, so if there's something you missed and you're taking notes, you can just come back and view it at any time. And again, if you have any specific questions, drop it in the comments, or go to abacusgroup.ca and drop them a line, and they'll get you or direct you to the information that you need. So first off, we got the student benefit. This is hot off the press. I think this was about 2 days ago. So can you just give us a little summary about that and what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great that the government's, they're soliciting a lot of feedback, and right now, especially with the severity of the situation, they're just trying to get money into the hands of people that need it the most, right? So, we're seeing as time goes on, they're releasing more and more initiatives, this being one of them. So exactly, like you said, just 2 days ago. So there's not too much details on it, but at a high level, they announced the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. So that will be eligible for post-secondary students and recent graduates who are ineligible for the CERB, which we'll talk a little bit more about, or EI. And at this point, they're unable to find work due to COVID. And usually they rely on that work, either part-time, full-time work, to afford to go to school. So they're going to subsidize students between May to August around $12.50 a month. And then if you're students with a dependent or have a disability, it'll be $17.50 per month. So that's a great initiative by the government. So I'm happy to hear about that. They also announced Canada Student Service Grants. So these grants will support students that are going back to school in the fall and the grants will be 5,000, but they haven't really released too many details on that. So more to follow.
Cool. Excellent. So I guess that's the freshest one. So they're, as everything, I think they're trying to announce things like as soon as they have most of the framework in place to kind of alleviate some fears and nervousness that people might be feeling, and then as they drill down the benefit or the specific details, then they release like exactly how it's going to work.
Yeah, and I think it gives it a chance for like the really technical practitioners to weigh in on it, or like small businesses, individuals, things like that too, right? Because they come up and they voice their concerns and say, hey, what about us? What about this industry in particular, or this type of individual? We don't get covered by, you know, the benefits that are available right now. What are you going to do for us? And then they kind of, you know, will modify the criteria or add new subsidies, which is great. So I think, you know, I know it's complex, and I know there's a lot of information out there, especially right now. But you know, given the circumstances and how they're handling it, I think, you know, there's a lot of great initiatives that people can take advantage of. So.
Awesome. All right. So again, if anyone has any questions here, you can totally get to it. But our next topic here, we're going to go over to the CERB and the new changes. I know they announced it at, I mean, this is one of the first initiatives they announced, and it has been changed a few times. So, Gus, if you just want to basically like go into maybe like in broad strokes what it is for anyone that might not know, and like really more importantly, what the new changes are to it specifically.
Yeah. So in its initial stages, the CERB was enacted sort of to help those people that weren't qualifying for EI. So these were people that were directly affected by COVID-19, but they weren't eligible to for EI. So this was that kind of secondary application that people could do. So at a high level, it's $2,000 for every 4-week period up to 16 weeks. So it works out to be about $500 a week. And for the criteria, that's, again, you're not eligible for EI and the CERB at the same time. You didn't quit work just to, you know, get this benefit. You reside in Canada, you're 15 years of age or older, and you earned at least $5,000 in the last 12 months or in 2019. So they've expanded the criteria a little more recently to self-employed individuals and people that are on maternity leave or on other leave, or they've actually exhausted their EI benefits and now they're no longer eligible and they can't go back to work either, right? So they've extended the criteria there. And then more recently, they've announced that even individuals that are earning up to $1,000 before taxes from either employment or self-employment income can still receive the benefit as a top-up, which is great. I think it's, you know, like I think that's a bit of controversy, but you know, at some point we got to get back to sort of a real sort of transition into what we would say is now the normal workplace, right? So hopefully this will encourage people to not just stay at home and collect the benefits and start to say, okay, well, you know, when they announce it and people can get out and start working again, this may encourage them and give them the right sort of push.
So basically, just to summarize, like from my understanding of it, like you could earn up to $1,000, so I could get a job somewhere, make $800, and the government would give me the other $1,200.
Yeah, that's right.
To 2,000.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. And in terms of applications, if people aren't sort of comfortable with the process right now, they've actually made it very, very simple online. So like, you know, even if you don't have an online account, I would encourage people who are looking to apply for the program to do that versus trying to call CRA, because, you know, it's unfortunate timing, but we're right at tax season too, right? And we can talk about all the filing deadlines a little bit later, but they're receiving an inordinate amount of phone calls, especially with all these programs and people asking questions and errors in terms of deposits and things like that, right? So trying to get someone on the phone, like we have some of our staff that are doing this for clients and they're waiting like 3, 4, 5 hours on the phone sometimes to get someone. So I would definitely encourage applying online. And like, even if you don't have an account right now and you register, it's very, very easy. And there is a verification process, but that doesn't stop you from applying. So you can, you know, ask the questions. They ask for your like SIN number, a bit of personal information, and then you can just log in and apply right away. It's like a few clicks.
Cool. That's awesome. Okay. This is, I've heard this question in myself in a bunch of circles and on Facebook. and some people asked it. So CERB and EI. I know some people have gotten like doubled up payments. Other people have all sorts of different kinds of issues with this. Can you just shed some light, just maybe in broad strokes? Angela has a question that we'll put up in 2 seconds here. But just in broad strokes, is it one or the other? If you do happen to by some mistake get paid twice, what are some precautions you should take to make sure you're in the clear come next year tax season, or like what's going to happen, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few complications with that, right? So the simple one may be that it's just timing of payments, right? Like when you've applied and for what period, and then when you've actually received the money in your account, right? So sometimes it's okay to receive both, just depending on, maybe you've ended EI and now you're applying for CERB, and it just happens that the payments coincide. But more likely than not, like there may have been an error in the application, right? Like if you applied for EI first and then you did a second application for CERB, what's happening is I think CRA is taking a more aggressive approach to just funding the individuals that need it right away. So they're paying first and asking questions later, right? So a lot of what's happening is the minute people apply, they're not doing any checks to make sure, oh yeah, this person also applied for EI during the period, they're not eligible. Like there's some high level checks, but some things fall through the cracks, right? So what happens is, yeah, sometimes you get doubled up on payments. At a high level, you can't receive EI and the CERB. You can't double dip. So it's one or the other. Sometimes people who are applying for EI legitimately are getting pushed into the CERB, and they're getting less payments than they would had they applied for EI, and that's causing some frustration for people too. But like, don't worry if that's the case. So if you're eligible to apply for EI, you can do it either before or after. So there's the ability to switch from EI to CERB, but you can't claim them both at the same time. So to your question about what do you do if that happens, I think you need to just first figure out, is it an error or is it just maybe timing of payments and when you've received these benefits? If it is an error, then there is a requirement to repay the government that money. So you can go on, like if it's a check, you can return the check to CRA, or if you've received it by direct deposit, you can make a payment out to the receiver general, put like repayment of CERB, and there's instructions online on how to do this, and put your SIN number in there, and you can just return the payment. And there are a lot of people that have been actually posting that. They're saying like, oh, the payments got doubled up, or they got EI and CERB, and they've been, returning the payments, and they're trying to use the system fairly, which is great to see.
I guess the thing to keep in mind is for sure, like if it's an honest mistake and you do your best to rectify it, the government's happy. If you try to pretend like they won't find you, they're gonna come find you and they'll find their money. They're good at that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Angela has a question here. I'm just going to hopefully pull it up. Oh, it's a weird color, but I will move it here. So she says, I can read this out loud here. She basically says she's going to be applying, or will applying for EI or CERB impact my maternity leave that she'll be taking in August, September. So her employer and union aren't giving her a straight answer, and she's just anxious about applying for something that might affect her in the next few months. So how does applying for EI or CERB affect maternity leave that's coming up, 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the road?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's tricky. My sister's in the same boat, actually. So what she's done, and this has worked, and she's verified it so far. So like, I haven't seen anything different. She can't. So if she's in a period right now where she isn't qualifying for anything, she's not getting paid, and maternity leave is down the road, and she's agreed with her employer to get paid for that. For the period she's not getting paid, she can absolutely apply for the CERB. So and then like it's only in a period of time where you're receiving both, right? Like you're getting a payment from your employer and you're collecting the CERB. Then you got to start, like a little light bulb in your head should probably like light up there and just be like it's probably not correct that I'm also getting paid by my employer and the government at the same time, especially given these are like subsidies for people who aren't, don't have a job or lost their job or things like that. So at this point, I'd say, yeah, I think coordinate. apply. Again, the CERB periods are for fixed 4-week periods, right? So right now there's only two. There's one from March 15th to April 11th, and then April 12th to May 9th. So you have to apply for those two periods independently online. So you can apply for one and not the other, vice versa. So I'd say we can definitely chat after this call, and we can look at your individual circumstances, because I'll probably just preface this. I should have said this before, but in the individual circumstance can add complexity and may change my answers and everything like that. So, but definitely can help look into that for you. But at a high level, yeah, I think you should be able to apply.
Awesome. Excellent. Again, if you have more questions and things keep popping up, please put them in comments. We'll be more than happy to address them as they come up. Another one, if you're self-employed and CERB, so how does that work?
Yeah, so I think that's really bucketing into this new criteria, right? So I think for a while the self-employed person they weren't really eligible. So now it's if they're still kind of working, but they've really seen an adjustment in income, they can still apply for the CERB as well. So I think it's just keeping meticulous records, right? So because it's a recent announcement, and there's some clarifications around, it's 1K pre-tax income. Is that really fair for the self-employed individual? A lot of them are saying that's, that ends up being nothing, right? So, if it's over that, then they're disqualified from collecting CERB. So there can be some complexity for self-employed people, unfortunately, but I think at least that additional criteria is there to sort of help aid any sort of income adjustment that they've had right now due to COVID-19.
Cool. Awesome. All right. We got a question here from Ryan in terms of, do we have any guidance on what we should set aside from CERB for next year's taxes? So you're getting that money. How should you, obviously it's not all free. You can't just go to Vegas. Well, no one can go to Vegas, but what should you do? What's a good plan here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's good to know, good to differentiate between EI and CERB, because EI, usually your payments are deducted at source, right? So meaning taxes and are automatically deducted and remitted to CRA on your behalf. So that the amount you receive is after tax, whereas the CERB is gross payments. They're just paying you that weekly payment, and it is taxable. So I think you need to really evaluate what your total income is for the year, including the benefits that you're receiving. And then that can kind of guide you as to how much you should be setting aside. Because if you're in a low income threshold, there's a chance you don't need to remit any of that to the government. But if you're close to that 60K-ish range with the CERB, then you want to maybe set aside, $250, $300 from each of the payments to kind of, take care of that tax burden. But again, look at it from an overall annual year and try and do that calculation, and that can give you some guidance on how much you should save on the side.
Cool. Awesome. So I guess the key is, remember that it is taxable. It's basically they're giving you income. This is not just a grant of sorts. It's just income.
Yeah.
And you are going to have to pay the taxes back on it. It's not after tax.
Yeah. Unfortunately, right? I think the ideal would have been it's just a grant, and it's kind of a free for all for everybody, and there's no, there's a bit of a tax shelter there, but and who knows, it might change depending on how long this lasts, right? But for now, at least it's sort of that minimum income level is taken care of, and hopefully most of the people that are applying for it rightfully get it, and it's covering people off.
Cool. All right. Next here on the topic, when should you consider deferring a payment? So you got whether, and this is going to be maybe even a broad topic as well when it comes to is it a tax payment? Is it credit cards? Should you try to work with your bank on a mortgage? That kind of stuff. When should you choose deferral? When should you maybe just try to make it through?
Yeah, no, that's some great points. And I think, like you said, it's broad strokes, because there's so many programs out there, and there's so many different service providers that you use on a day-to-day basis. You kind of got to go through meticulously and look at your current financial situation. Do you have some savings? And how long do you think you can weather the storm, right? Like a lot of times, like we're advising most of our clients, prepare for the worst, and then if you can take those deferrals without any negative impact, and you think it's going to help your cash flow, then it's something to consider. I've heard some particularly bad stories in terms of like mortgage deferrals and things like that, where they deferred the mortgage or they deferred their credit card or something like that, and it's affected their credit rating. So I think it's important to look into what are the repercussions of doing the deferral, and then just keep in mind that it's not like deferral forever. You're going to have to pay it at some point, right? So I do anticipate this sort of crunch later down the road for a lot of people where they're putting off their credit card payments or putting off their mortgage payments, and then at some point reality is going to set in and you're going to have all those bills back again, and there may be a bigger crunch at that point in time too, right? So definitely be meticulous with sort of your cash flow projections, and I like to say be cautiously pessimistic as opposed to cautiously optimistic, right? And sort of plan for the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think the important thing to keep in mind is like none of these I guess initiatives are like free money. They're all meant to basically just spread the burden that we all have over the next however many months out. So anything that when you defer or any loan program or anything, for the most part, just meant to soften the blow. But there's nothing that's just being like, oh, hey, you now don't have to pay your next 3 mortgage payments forever. We've just made them disappear. That's not what
right.
it is.
And a lot of times it's deferral of principal too, right? So they may still be charging you interest on top of that. So just because the cash isn't going out doesn't mean you're not going to pay for it eventually, right? So definitely things to consider. So I think it's based on severity of situation, right? There's so many things. Like I know I just got an email yesterday from our insurance provider for benefits for our company, and there's a subsidy for a few months there, right? So I think it's just being open to all sort of avenues and options and exploring and seeing what works in your particular situation, and then assessing whether or not it makes sense given the facts and circumstances.
Cool. Excellent. All right. If anyone has any personal questions, this is kind of the end of the general personal segment. We can totally come back to it. Or you can, again, put it in comments and we'll bring it up here. We're going to go over to some business stuff. And I know we have some business owners here watching. Again, there might be different levels of business owners. So we can start off with like loan and financing alternatives that people might be looking for to get them through this time. I know that they announced that $40,000 government loan, but some people don't qualify for that for a variety of reasons. So what are some alternatives that people can look into? Where should they even begin to look? Where's the best place to start?
Yeah, I think it can be a little crazy. I'm actually just looking at it right now, but the main COVID-19 response plan on the website for CRA is not bad, because it's got little pull downs and it says, for individuals, for business, what are your financing alternatives? And it just lists it in, sort of order of priority in terms of what, for broad strokes. Yeah, like you said, the Canadian Emergency Business Account is kind of a no-brainer, right? Like that interest-free loan. But then, people are getting kicked out of that because they, maybe not paying payroll or not enough payroll. So they're not eligible for that loan. And banks are being pretty hard on that too, in terms of, if say you have an individual that didn't pay themselves T4 income, but they were self-employed income, then, but they're still sort of operating a business, they still can't apply for this. So I would say look there first. Some of the major credit availabilities around BDC Bank. So like they're really lending a ton of money right now for small businesses, just depending on what your revenue thresholds are. So for any businesses under $1 million, they're lending up to $300,000 at a preferred term and rates. And all of these are, I'll just preface it, a lot of these are variable based on the lender, right? So the government isn't facilitating these loans. They're pushing the money down to the banks and the financial institutions to do it. So a lot of criteria may vary, and the application process may vary. And unfortunately, the banks are also biased to give certain people loans and not other people loans, right? Like they're all from a risk perspective and who's going to repay those loans. And, the stronger businesses, unfortunately, will have a little bit more of a priority. So, hopefully you're hitting that first bucket and you can at least take advantage of the CEBA. But if not, that's one option. So I'd say the business credit availability program is really good. And they're loaning up to $6 million plus, just depending on the size of your business. So a lot of credit availability right now. And then past that, they've also pushed down to the regional development agency to work with particular agents to determine whether you're eligible for funding. So they on CRA they list a bunch of options. If you don't hit any of those, check out that website, and you'd basically be paired with an agent to determine whether or not you can get additional funding. But one way or another, it seems like the government's in a position where they've said, we're trying to look after everybody here. So don't fret if you don't qualify for, one or two of these options. Hopefully there's something else available for you. You just gotta, keep an eye out on the website. Like things are changing on a daily basis. We're doing frequent announcements too. I try to get ahead of this and send information to our clients as well. So, hopefully additional availabilities for loans come out in the future too. So.
Cool, awesome. And then I guess that kind of covers what the options are for people who aren't eligible. Just going through again, both ways are you're always borrowing money from the future, so you still got to be really meticulous and careful with how you're going to use the funds. And I like your cautiously pessimistic outlook on making sure that you really set yourself up for success, because I think I know specifically, like even in the gym industry, but in general, like everyone's hoping for a quick rebound, but no one can predict what the rebound will be like when or when things do open again. So I think the thing is right now is about being very, very cautious and planful and mindful about how you're going to set things up for the future.
Yeah, and I think it's not going to be I think we've seen a lot of news articles and announcements made saying it's not going to be an immediate snapback, right? Like they're going to gradually introduce people and transition people back to work. So you got to think this is going to stretch out a lot longer than just till May or June, right? And then you also kind of got to factor in what are people's habits going to be like after a situation like this, right? Like they're in a crisis mode, or their savings have dried up. They're not going to just go back to everyday ordinary spending or entertainment or travel, right? So people are going to be a lot more cautious. So I'd say definitely be ruthless about sort of cash flow management, project out worst case scenarios, and then make a decision from there. Try to make it objectively as possible, like you said.
Cool, awesome. That's such good information here. We got a question I'm going to pull up here. Taylor's got a question here. She basically says, for former students who are paying back debt through the National Student Loan, should they continue repaying the debt if they still have regular income? Apparently they're allowing deferred payments and not charging interest until end of September of this year. And she just wants to know, like, they're obviously going to have to repay it anyways, but should they continue paying regularly? Kind of what should they do?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit more of a personal scenario. I'd say, if she can afford to continue making the payments, sure. But it's so independent on the person's financial situation. And what I'd say is, like, if you feel like you're going to be in a crunch, 2-3 months down the road, maybe consider deferral, right? And taking advantage of any of the options you can right now. But, if cash flows are reasonable and you don't anticipate any sort of significant changes as, maybe the situation continues to worsen, then, maybe you want to continue making those payments. But yeah, look at those options and see, is there any implication of deferral, to your credit or anything else otherwise? That's a very particular situation. So can definitely try and look into it and see if there's any additional information on websites or whatever regarding this. But the government loans tend to be quite forgiving. So I'd say, you're probably leaning towards like it being reasonable to try and defer it rather than not.
Cool. Excellent. Thanks, Gus. All right, we're on to, I guess we can go down to the 10% subsidy here. So just a little breakdown of this 10% subsidy. How's it work? That kind of thing.
Yeah, this is the fun part. I've had and my partner's just over here shaking his head too. Like we've had multiple conversations with clients and people just asking questions, and like these subsidies are not straightforward. They're pretty complex. So the 10% subsidy at a high level, it's basically just a 3 month relief from part of your payroll deduction. So all it's essentially doing is saying 10% of the pay from March 18th to June 19th is subsidized at a rate of 10%, up to $1,375 per employee, or $25,000 for the employer. So this isn't a cash reimbursement. This is a deduction you calculate, and you basically carve out a portion of the taxes that you would pay ordinarily and take off 10% of what you're responsible for paying. So you don't need to apply for this. If you meet the criteria, which is, like you're an eligible business based on, the CRA's definition, which is like individuals, partnerships, NPOs, charities, most Canadian corporations, and you have a business number and a payroll account registered on or before March 18th, and you're paying eligible employees, then you qualify. So this one tends to be one that most people are eligible to qualify for. If they're a small business and they're paying employees, usually you can start doing this right away. The mechanics are such that, so say you didn't know about this and now you know about it, there's still a way to like catch up and claw back on those deductions. So don't worry about that. I'd say the only tricky part is if you're not using a payroll provider, the calculation has to be done manually, right? You got to do the calculation, track each of the employees' deductible amounts, track your total deductible amounts, and then reduce your federal or provincial taxes. You can't reduce CPP or EI. You got to continue to contribute there. So that's also another nuance as well. You can't just arbitrarily deduct from your sources as well. It's got to be from federal or provincial tax. So yeah, definitely one to consider applying for. A lot of the payroll providers for our small business clients do this automatically. So usually there's just a button or a form that needs to be filled out, and then the payroll provider will do it on your behalf. So I'd say, for us, we're always sort of the proponents of like, why would you do the payroll manually? Like it's a pain to do the manual calculations, remit it manually, deposit it to the employees manually. Like it's crazy. And there's some very lightweight payroll providers out there that are very cost efficient that take care of this for you, and they would take care of the 10% subsidy as well.
Yeah, I can say as a QuickBooks Online guy, no plug because I have no affiliation, but they do have a button that I hit and it does all the calculations for me, and it's actually such a time saver because as we go into the 75% in a second, we see that there is no button to hit. But the 10% hit wherever you are, yeah, if you're a small business person, I used to use Wave also. They're based out of Toronto. That was very, very lightweight. I just wanted more features. QuickBooks Online is great. I would definitely recommend if you're doing things manually, it's the time to just try to automate as much of this stuff as you can, because when things like this come along, you hit a button and it's going to save you hours.
Oh yeah, and it reduces chance for error too, right? Like something like payroll, so like you got to get that right? You can't mess around with employees' pay, so and it's got to be timely, and you want good record keeping. So why not outsource that? Like we all have, we're all busy. We're all trying to manage, small businesses and like our personal situations through this pandemic. Like something like doing these calculations manually on top of that is, just another burden, unfortunately. So.
Right. Okay. 75% wage subsidy. This is the tricky one as a business owner, just in broad strokes. And I think this is definitely one of those, if you have a lot more questions about this, if there's any business owners watching, this is one that for sure you want to get in touch with Gus or your accountant or whatever on, because there's a lot of nuance to this one. Yeah,
for sure. I definitely suggest, just off the top of the bat, like read through the criteria very carefully, and then, attempt to do it, and then go to your accountant. Doesn't have to be me, doesn't have to, like, you can look online and things like that, but try and get someone else to verify this, because for sure, There's already, rumors down from like CRA that they're going to audit people, especially the ones that are covering 100% of their wages. At some point, they're going to look at your records to make sure that you're eligible. So having proper record keeping now before you go and apply for the subsidy will pay dividends later on. So at a high level, this one is, a little bit different from the 10% one where it's a clawback of remittances. This is an actual cash payment, which is great for small business owners. So generally, at a high level, it covers up to 75% of an employee's wages, up to $847 a week. So, I think big relief here for a lot of small business owners, and I think this one will definitely help out with cash flow. A lot of small businesses, their major line item salaries. So this is a great subsidy. When we get into the actual mechanics of like how do you know if you qualify? Here's where it starts to get a little tricky. You have to look at revenue reduction comparatively, right? So there's two ways to look at it. And they just kind of amended this recently too. You're either looking at a qualifying period against last year, or you're comparing it to the average of January and February. So you get two choices to try and compare to see if you meet this revenue deduction. And if you don't, like, you got to pick one or the other. You can't keep switching to be like, oh, period one, I'm going to use, compare March 2020 to March 2019. And then period two, I'm going to compare April 19 to the average of January and February. So you got to be clear on sort of what comparative option you're going to choose. And then make sure that you're qualifying for the reduction. So again, right now there's only 3 periods. So they're qualifying from March 15th all the way to June. And those periods you need to apply for separately. So you need to continually sort of compare the current period you're in to the previous periods and make sure that the revenue criteria is being met. Now, where there's also some additional complications is like, what is revenue? How am I measuring revenue? Is it cash or is it accrual accounting? These are all complexities where it's quite broad in terms of the guidance. You can choose cash or accrual methods. So that's another thing to consider before you start applying, right? So a lot of people from, like, say, an accounting revenue recognition standpoint are making money, but the cash flow's dried up, right? So maybe you want to compare the revenue reduction on a cash basis as opposed to accrual. But again, you can't go back and forth. So once you choose one, you've kind of made your bed. You gotta use that going forward. And then in terms of, so moving on into like, okay, so you've met the criteria. So again, for period one, they're giving a little bit of relief. So they said the revenue reduction needs to be only 15% for March in comparison to either March 2019 or the average of January and February. And then in April, it's at least 30%. In May, it's at least 30%. So some things to consider there. And then the mechanics of the calculation. So here's the fun part, right? So we get into, I think, let's look at the drivers first, and then I'll try to go at a high level in terms of explaining the subsidy. But just, don't get too lost in the explanation. At a high level, the subsidy is capped at $847 per week per eligible employee. There's no maximum for the employers. So, for the most part, existing employees are probably meeting the criteria to obtain the subsidy. And that's the way it's designed, right? It's to help all these small businesses. So don't get too lost in that. So some things to think about. At first, you need to know whether the employee was employed prior to March 15th or subsequent to that, right? Did you hire someone up just now thinking, oh, well, now I'm going to take advantage of this wage subsidy and hire up a bunch of people? That's great too, but then you're limited to 75% of the salaries actually paid, whereas you may get a higher subsidy for existing employers. The second thing to consider is whether or not the employee is at arm's length. So arm's length criteria generally just means like if the employee doesn't own the business or isn't part of the immediate family of the owner, then they're generally arm's length and you don't need to worry about that. It's only for like related individuals, then you got to start looking into the sub criteria. And then the last one is whether or not the employee was on paid leave. So there is a separate benefit for that for employers that are, paying or covering employees that are on some type of leave, medical leave or something like that, where they can also claw back all the remittances as well. So that gives them an extra deduction. So that's something to consider too. So if we go into the nitty gritty of the mechanics, the existing employees is based on this comparative. So the comparative, the first part of it is just 75% of your remuneration paid up to $847 a week. So you would compare that to the lesser of what you actually pay the employee for that period, 75% of the pre-crisis weekly remuneration, and I'll get into that, and then $147 a week. So I know it seems weird, but because it's greater of calculation, you usually just had if the employees past a certain salary point, you're capped at 847 and it's just 847. So sorry, don't get too complicated or too bogged down. Don't get too bogged down with sort of the criteria there. And another thing I'd say is definitely use the guidance online. Like I know the application portal just opened up, and though the Excel sheet, and I think we were talking about this, Alex, the Excel sheet they provided is very, very complicated. At least the pretext and how it's calculated on the website is quite straightforward, and they kind of explain the mechanics of how to go through it. But I'd say use that. There's a lot of resources out there. A lot of tax accountants are coming out with templates on how to calculate this. So I definitely say, try your hand at doing the calculation and then verify it with one of these templates. You should be getting the same number. And oftentimes it's, lo and behold, 847 per week per employee.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of high level. The base weekly remuneration, so that is you'd want to kind of compute the employee's pay between January and March 15th on a weekly basis, and that kind of gives you that base remuneration paid to determine this calculation. And a lot of these triggers and mechanisms are to just stop employers from double dipping, right? Like they're maybe laying off employees, and those employees are getting the CERB, and then they're trying to claw back and get the wage subsidy. They're trying to be cute there. So I think they're trying to just discourage that, and they've been very, very open about sort of different provisions there in terms of penalties, like very, very high penalties, and something that I've never seen. There's like some shaming provision in the act, which is kind of crazy, but they can like post up your name on a website or whatever, and potentially you get a reputational hit because they'll be like, oh, this person tried to screw out the government, right? So pretty severe repercussions. But again, majority of business owners aren't out there to slight the government. They're generally want to pay their fair share of taxes, but also at this time want to take advantage of the benefits, right? So don't be scared. Like you look objectively at the criteria and assess. We have some companies who are doing really well or unaffected, and they're like, well, can we also still apply for the 75% subsidy? It's like, come on, these aren't for businesses that are not impacted by these type of economic circumstances. Like maybe it's like a smaller subscription based company or something like that. So you won't apply there, and you probably shouldn't be applying. So but for the majority of us, where there's cyclical cycle, or you're a restaurant or something like that, this will really go a long ways into helping you kind of hopefully bide the time and survive this period of uncertainty.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Gus. We got a question here about how soon should you apply? Andrew doesn't need it at the moment, but he may, depending on how long this goes. So what's some considerations there? Should you just apply no matter what and just in case, or how should you kind of approach that decision?
Yeah. Again, that's sort of, not technically an accounting question, but what I'd say from my experience is, well, for one, they've just kind of released the guidance, and they've said that the poll is going to be available next week to apply, right? So the front page is there, but you can't go in through your My CRA account to apply just yet. They've said next week, early next week. So hopefully that's not delayed. So that would be the first period in which you could apply for, and you could sort of retroactively apply for period one, March 15th to April 11th. I just say be very meticulous and continue to track your cash flows and your business operations on more of a frequent basis, so you can determine right away whether or not you qualify. And at the same time, do your homework in advance of the calculation, right? Like what could you potentially receive if you do qualify, right? So everything's kind of lined up and in order. And if you have to apply, then you're good to go. Some other recommendations I'd say is definitely make sure you have a My Business portal online for CRA. Now they are doing this sort of rotational application. So based on the month you were born in, you can have access to the website to apply for the benefits, with Friday and the weekends being an exception. That's a free for all. But so that like all these things can add up and start tacking on time to you delaying your application. So I'd say have the CRA account ready, have direct deposit ready, so that, if you do have to apply, it's the quickest way to receive the money.
Awesome. All right. Last business question we had queued up, and then we'll go into Q&A. So if you're listening, you got some questions, please toss a comment here. When should you consider deferring? So I guess this is the same question as we asked on the personal level, but on the business level.
Yeah.
When should you start looking at, maybe approaching your landlord, talking to some of your bill payments, all that kind of stuff? What should you consider here?
Yeah. So again, kind of same thing applies here, but probably at a greater scale, right? So, be ruthless with your cash flow forecasting. Don't be optimistic and thinking you're going to secure all these contracts in the future that like before this situation would have been a no-brainer, but maybe now there's more risk, or, customers may not be willing to pay you anymore. And fact of the matter is, like, a lot of us are in like a B2B environment too, where, if your business is stretched, you may be stretching out the payments to your vendors and your suppliers. And then it's kind of this trickle effect where, everybody's getting squeezed, and then they're kind of holding on to payments. They're not going to pay so quickly. And then you're like, well, I'm not getting the payment, so I'm not going to pay my suppliers, right? So it kind of just snowballs a little bit there, right? So I'd say start out with the cash flow forecasting and be meticulous on the collection front. So like if you are in a business to business environment, that you have those processes in place to check your aged receivables, and you are following up with your customers to make sure, they're paying promptly, or renegotiating payments with them, as needed, right? Like we're all in this situation together. So like, at least from our side, we're pretty sympathetic with our clients, and if they're in a hard situation, we're not asking them to pay, right? So we can work on a client by client basis, and I'm sure a lot of businesses are open to doing that too. But that being said, you got to factor all this into saying, yeah, well, you got to balance that with keeping operations afloat, right? So oftentimes if you're hit hard, we're telling our clients to be really, really aggressive with sort of what they can take advantage of, because who knows how long this is going to drag out for, and how much I think it's apparent that the government's going to kind of continually come out with these support programs to assist us, but for how long, and like what is the end point where they're going to say, maybe not enough's enough, and now everybody's going back to work, and then you're in the situation where business isn't coming back as quick as you thought either, right? So plan out all the worst case scenarios, and just try and sort of play a little devil's advocate with yourself, and just say, well, yeah, like, am I realistically going to meet these targets or not? And we plan to be on the more pessimistic side and say, if those options are available and there's no, you're weighing out the benefits versus the drawbacks, like we're saying, go for the deferrals, go for the, especially the tax deferrals. That's a big one too, right? So if your company is paying installment payments, like stop making installment payments, sit on cash. Like I think, like before this, you were saying the same thing. Like that cash is king right now, at least from an operational standpoint. You want to have that gunpowder available to use it when you need it. So, if you can defer making those payments, try your best to do that without, it being too much of an impact on your business. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good, actually. All right. If anyone has any questions, we can totally add them to the list here. We've answered, I think, everyone's question as they popped up. So if you're listening, please, and you got a question you want to ask, drop it in the comments here. Otherwise, we are going to leave this screen or leave this video up so you can totally rewatch it, scrub forward to whatever part you want to cover. And again, if you do want to get in touch with Gus, you can find them on Facebook or at abacusgroup.ca. Yeah. Any other specific? I guess I think we covered like almost everything that I've seen come up over the last couple of months. I know a lot of people had, or last couple of weeks. I know a lot of people had different questions when it came to how to specifically deal with the CERB and the self-employed stuff. But I think the new criteria since that has come out since has kind of simplified that a little bit.
Yeah, I did. Let's see, because I wrote all these down. There were some questions that I don't think we got to, so I could just run through those, and if we have spare time, hopefully someone will ask a question, or we can change a topic or something like that.
One question here. It's a business question. We can pop this up, and then we can run through those things.
Sure.
So here we go. We got Kyle's asking a question about the CEBA loans. So. Let me pull it up here. This question: the ones that are 80% backed by BDC and EDC, how does that the remainder? So 80% backed through BDC and EDC, and the remainder through your financial institutions. Have you seen any details outlining how the interest rates are going to be calculated?
Yeah, no, you know what? I've been trying to find a little more details on that now. Like it's kind of been broad strokes for our clients, so we've been going after sort of the easy subsidies, with the CEBA being the major one, and just making sure our clients have that first. Now they're looking to alternate lending to try and secure loans and things like that. And there's been a lot of pressure on, obviously the key lending rates are, as low as they're going to be right now. So the government's trying to pressure a lot of the banks to come out with favorable loans for small businesses. So if you need a loan now's the time to try and investigate to get it. Your interest rates are going to vary, right? Like I know, at least from a CEBA perspective, if you don't meet that payback period by December 31st, 2020, the interest rate pops up to 5% at a 3-year fixed term, right? So I mean, you could probably use that as a basis to what a reasonable loan interest rate's going to be, but I gotta imagine it's going to be pretty favorable right now, and the interest rates are going to be probably as low as you're going to see. And the encouragement by the government to back the banks, especially BDC, funding these loans is unprecedented at this point. So like they're really in a situation to try and to lend to small businesses, sort of with really, really open criteria. So yeah, sorry, I know that's a circular way of saying I'm not sure.
Cool. All right. You said you had a couple other things that you'd written down that we can cover. If we get any other questions, I'll
sure. Yeah, no, I know I was trolling that board, so I know there was some people who were asking, how do I switch from EI to CRB? So again, if you've applied for EI and you've received those benefits, some people, and this seems to be situational, some people are getting, pushed into CERB automatically, even though they applied for EI. Fact of the matter is, I think the government's just trying to go hard at trying to get everybody benefits and the payments they need, and they're trying to reconcile it later on. But what I'd say is, like, if you've exhausted your EI benefits, then you have to go separately apply for the CERB. And then the only other tax implication I'd say is, if you are, like, say this dragged out long, and your income for the year is going to be over 66,000, and you've claimed EI and the CERB, like, you got to start looking at seeing whether or not some of the EI implications are going to apply, and you're going to have to pay back that too, right? So definitely look at it from like an individual circumstance for when it comes to the next year's tax time rolls around, and you're not surprised, right?
I guess the way you're talking about, like, being cautiously pessimistic, it might be difficult to project your cash for the entire year, right now, especially if you're self-employed or something. At the same time, it doesn't hurt to err on the side of caution, set aside some money, with the hopes that you do have to pay, and then if you don't, at least you set it aside because you're going to likely need it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Someone asked if you need approval from the workplace to apply for the CERB. So that one seemed a little bit open-ended, but I was like, I'm hoping the person was asking, do you need to be laid off? Like, do you need to get an ROE or whatever? And the answer is no. Workers can still be attached to their employer, but they're not getting paid, and then they can still receive the benefits. So, and that I think is right on the CRA website too. So you can even go there just to double check.
Awesome.
And then sorry.
No, that's a great point to make, because I know some people were confused about that. And then as an employer, it also makes it a little easier because we don't have to issue necessarily a whole bunch of ROEs just to get this process rolling for people.
Yeah, again, like we were talking about payroll providers, like they're all getting hammered too, right? Because there's so many people that are applying for ROEs and they just can't process them fast enough, and same with the government. So this is kind of that sort of alternate solution, right? So and then what else do I have here? I think a lot of these we ended up covering off. Duplicate payments, the application process again. So how do you know when you need to reapply for the CERB? So they are in fixed week periods, right? 4 weeks. So right now there's two, like if you went to apply online, there's two little drop downs on the website. And it'll say March 15th to April 11th and April 12th to May 9th. So you can apply for both of those separately at the same time if you want for those weekly periods. And then, if it drags on longer, I'm sure there'll be more 4-week increments that you can go online and apply for. And then usually it's within like 3 to 5 business days. It tends, like for some of our clients that are applying, they're getting payment to their bank pretty quickly. So, which is great.
Cool. Excellent. All right. I think that's it for questions. We'll give it maybe 30 more seconds if anyone pops up a question. You got another thing? Yeah.
I think we did. Yeah. So I think we may have skipped the personal tax filing too, right? So it's now filing deadlines deferred to June 1st. So that's great. So it gives people another opportunity to defer paying taxes if they were going to be. What I'd suggest is, just again, review your situation. And if you think you're going to be getting refunds back or credits, like I would definitely not wait until the final deadline in August 31st to do your taxes. Like get it done now. Like it's probably in CRA's interest to kind of get through those tax returns pretty quickly too, and process and assess, and like you'll get your refund right away. So definitely something to consider. And then the childcare benefit too went up a little bit. So some of the credits you can get went from you get an extra $300 per child. So on average, they're expecting about $500 extra benefit to family members. And if you already have this benefit, you don't need to apply for it. You just expect like you're going to get that payment. And then the other one is the GST credit. So for any low and modest income families, they'll get a one-time GST credit of $400 for individuals and $600 for couples. So that, again, that you need to apply for. It's based on, average income, and, you'd be receiving that check in the mail too.
Cool. We got a question here. Ryan initially applied for EIs, laid off on March 15th. They rolled him into the CERB automatically. Then they got the $2,000 deposit, but then they also sent him all his EI. So should he try to send back the CERB, or should he try to send back his EI payments? What should he do?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think ordinarily, depending on individual circumstances, you tend to get paid a little bit more from the EI side first. So I'd say maybe depending on the timing, look at what you're receiving from both of the programs. A lot of times they're pushing people automatically into the CERB, even though you're eligible for EI. So that's kind of one I would definitely maybe call up CRA. I know it's a pain in the butt to do, but call and just make sure that you are still eligible for EI and you didn't get pushed into the CERB, but you probably have to repay. I'd say repay the CERB, and then if you exhaust your EI benefits, apply for the CERB again.
Cool, awesome. All right, guys. Any other questions here? Kelly said she filed a refund weeks ago, still waiting. I'm sure the how long it takes you to get your refund is going to vary based on a bunch of stuff right now. But the sooner you get it, the sooner you get in the queue, the sooner you'll have your money.
Yeah, I'd say, I tend to be a little bit more like, just from my own personal standpoint, I'm pretty quick about it, obviously, because I'm just doing hundreds and thousands of tax returns right now. So I do my own, like, right at the start, just get it out of the way. So I did it, way back, and I got it within 2 weeks. But yeah, I think now we're kind of through the thick of things. So I'd say the sooner the better. And like you said, you're in queue, and hopefully it's processed relatively quickly. Especially if you're going to get a refund, they tend to be a little bit, I'm sure at this point a little bit more forgiving in terms of their compliance requirements internally. Like, that's again only speculation, but yeah.
All right. Dean's got a question here, and I think he's on the money, but he's just asking to be sure. For the CEBA, he's reading that 25% of the loan is forgivable if the other 75% is paid by December 31st, 2022. Does that apply to everyone who qualified? Is there a separate process for that, or how does that work?
Nope. I think that, like you said, I think he's got it. He's got it on the money there. So that's like, again, you'd be working with your primary financial institution to get this loan. And at least, for our application, I see it as a separate account that you can make payments to whenever. So there's flexibility on when you're repaying. So I'd say as long as you pay back the 75% before that date, that I'm not really sure on the mechanics of it, but like, you wouldn't have to pay back that 10K. So.
Cool. Awesome. I think that's just some incentive as a business to pay it back sooner, really.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think you said it best. It's a negative interest rate loan, so like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, no, seriously, it's they're basically gonna, if you manage your cash well and you can get through this okay, they're basically paying you to borrow money, which is unheard of. I don't think that's ever.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, I think I learned about that in school, that it's possible, but I've never experienced it. So, as a
Yeah,
business,
I think that's baffling a lot of people.
Yeah, it's important to manage that, and again, not treat it like free money, because you gotta, it's incentive to pay it back sooner than later, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's just like, a lot of times this, maybe the first time small businesses are taking on a loan, so just managing what it is to comply with those requirements, and keep reminders in your calendar on, and manage, again, that cash flow projection is critical, right? Like, when are you going to repay this? So yeah, it's exciting to get the money when you need it and spend it as quickly as you get it, but you got to plan on terms of repayment too. And for sure, yeah, you don't want to get dinged with getting that free 10K, right? So if you can pay it back before December 31st, 2022, why not?
True story. Awesome. All right. I think that's it for the questions. Anything else that you think we might have missed? Again, for anyone that's watching right now that just tuned in, we're going to leave this video up so you'll be able to watch it after, scrub through. You can go to the Abacus Group website at abacusgroup.ca, get some more info, or connect with them on Facebook. I know they're on here. And if you have any other questions, you can totally even comment here. We'll see it. And if someone misses it, I'll make sure that Gus takes a look at it, these comments, and the video is going to stay up.
Great. Yeah,
Awesome.
happy to help. So if anybody's got any questions, or like, your particular circumstance, like, yeah, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, Gus, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure, I mean, this is crazy for you. It would be normally crazy during tax season, but never mind with all this crisis going on. So thanks for taking the time. Guys that are tuning in, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any other stuff, or again, as this develops, if you want us to have Gus on again as things get tricky, just let us know in the comments, or any other things that you want us to cover. Please let us know. We want to get you some good information, because like you said, Gus, we're all in this together. So let's work together as best we can to make sure we have to clarify some of the information, because everyone's good at something, and you're good at accounting. So thank you for sharing that expertise with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks again for having me, Alex. It was great to see you and chat with you about this, and yeah, we'll hopefully catch up soon.
That's right. All right. Later, guys.
Thanks.